Welcome to the Leaderonomics Show. Today we have a very interesting guest with us, a writer, a broadcaster and a columnist, Martin Jacques. He's a visiting professor and fellow at NUS and the Asian Research Center in LSE. He's written for numerous newspapers including The Times and The Independent, and we have him here as a guest of our show. Welcome to Malaysia. What brings you to Malaysia, Martin?
Well, essentially to promote my new book,
Okay.
When China Rules the World.
And that's the book right there, When China Rules the World.
This is
so
the book.
what's the book about?
Well, the book is about a huge transformation in the world
Okay.
as the centre of gravity moves from the traditional developed rich world
Yep.
to the developing world,
Sure.
and the particular importance of China in that process.
Okay. But you say when China rules the world, not if China rules the world, right? So you're making an assumption that it is bound to happen?
I think when makes a stronger title than if.
Okay. But, I mean, in regards to your own perspective on things, you think it's going to be a when rather than an if?
Yes, I do think it's more likely to be a when. Of course, there's never a certainty about these things. If you're
Yep.
looking into the future, then lots of things can happen,
Okay.
which can change the scenario.
Okay.
But I think it's more likely to be when than if.
Okay. And why?
But I should add to you that I, of course, don't mean literally
Okay.
that China will rule the world
Right.
any more than America has ruled the
Ruled the
world for
world.
the last 50
so,
years.
So it's more of an economic perspective, or?
No, it's on the contrary. It's the argument of the book is to say, look, so far the discussion of the rise of China has been almost solely in economic terms,
Right.
and people now widely accept it's going to have a huge transformative effect.
Right.
My argument is that the political and cultural effect of the rise of China will at least be as great
Okay.
as the economic.
Okay. And you also seem to explore a little bit in terms of the model, right? Governance models in the West and in China. Is that another thing that we may start to see, where the governance models of China and some of the I guess East Asian countries start to emerge as the model for the world versus a democratic model?
Yeah, I mean, certainly the tradition of governance in China, I mean, not just now, but over a long period, has been very different
Okay.
from the traditional Western nation states. And I would expect over time this to exercise growing influence on the rest of the world.
Okay.
Of course, the governance model will change in China over
Yep.
time, just as it's changed in the East Asian
Right,
tigers.
right.
But I expect it to remain quite distinctive.
Okay. And why do you say, I mean, are there certain things that you're seeing, trends or changes that are happening right now that gives you the confidence to say that China will, ultimately emerge and rule the world?
Well, the most obvious thing is the economic growth
Okay, yeah,
over
that's
the
one.
last 30 years.
That's right. But so is India, and so is Brazil, and
But China's economic record has been extraordinary.
Yep, true.
And, I mean, India is a more recent development.
Yep.
We'll have to see how it goes,
Yep.
but it looks promising. And Brazil and so on, nowhere compares with China over
Right.
the last 30 years. That's the first point.
Right.
And the second point is this: it's got a huge population.
Okay.
And so the impact of the rise of China is enormous, even though still it remains a pretty poor country.
Okay. And is there other insights that you've seen that are happening out there that helps you draw this conclusion?
Well, in a way, it's quite a traditional idea that as a country becomes more powerful economically, so it begins to be able to exercise much greater political and cultural power.
Okay.
Paul Kennedy, in his book *The Rise of Fall of Great Nations*, argues that economic power is a precondition for political and cultural power, and I share that view.
Okay. Now, if in a perspective of a business owner who's exploring China as a place to do business and also to be at or to invest in, what would your advice be?
It's a good place to invest. I mean, if you've got a country growing as quickly as China's been, and it will carry on growing quickly, maybe not as quickly, but still carrying on growing as quickly, and with a huge transformation in the population and such a big population, it's got to be a good place to invest.
Okay. And if they haven't, it's really a must to invest now. Alluding the fact that ultimately, if they, I mean, I've seen some of the charts. You say that if China does become as big an economy or even bigger than the US, it's getting in early has its advantages, right?
Of course, yes. I mean, it's if you can call it right as early as you can, then you're going to have an advantage. Because if later on, when everyone's doing it, then the advantages are less.
Yeah, yeah. You also founded this think tank, Demos, right? What's that, and what do you guys do in Demos?
Well, it's a long time ago, actually. I first had the idea back in the early 90s, and we set it up in 1993.
Yep.
And the idea was to try and get new ways of thinking about public policy.
Okay, I due to time, I'm going to ask you a couple of quick questions. Just, in terms of perspective of economy, and also in terms of, a multitude of other things. What would be your advice if you are a person just, graduating out of college, coming out into the world, you see the fact there's China and all these things that are emerging out there. What advice would you give that sort of a person?
Well, I mean, each generation sets its bearings, doesn't it, and has its orientation and inclinations. And for a generation that's coming through university and college now, I would say the future is in this region rather than in the West. I mean, historically, a lot of students from Malaysia would have gone west, and looked to London because of the colonial relationship, and Europe and the United States as the future. And I think that would be quite mistaken. It doesn't mean that there isn't a lot to learn from the West. Of course there is, and there will be for some time to come. But the future is in East Asia.
And if I'm a CEO in the US right now, or I'm a business in the US, what advice would you give me in light of some of the things that you write about?
Well, we're at the early stages of, in my view, a long-term decline in the relative position of the American economy, and I would expect this to continue. In a way, we can see it more clearly as a result of the global financial crisis, which has underlined the weaknesses of the United States, and I don't expect those to go away. So we're actually witnessing, and parties to, spectators in even, one of those quite rare historical changes, processes which periodically punctuate global history.
Okay. Well, final question. We're currently in this whole economic downturn, or kind of an economic recessionary times. Well, I guess what's your take on that? And secondly, what would you do, especially in relation to China, India, and some of the emergence of countries in the East?
Well, as the global financial crisis is very important for several reasons, but there's two I want to underline. First of all, it's shown the vulnerability of the Western economies, and in particular the United States and the UK, but generally. Secondly, it's drawn attention to the shift in the global centre of gravity towards, in particular, China, but also to the developing countries more generally, and that has been that's been reflected in the rise of the G20 and the relative demise, actually, of the G7, thereby enshrining the developing countries as a fundamental element in global economic governance.
Okay, thank you. One final question. Any piece of advice for folks in Malaysia or in Southeast Asia?
Well, no, all I'm going to say, actually, is I'm going to say something very personal about it, which is, that I know Malaysia extremely well. I met my wife as Malaysian in 1993.
Oh, fantastic.
She died under terrible circumstances in 2000. She was Indian Malaysian. And my son is half Malaysian. And he comes to Malaysia every year. No, not often, every year without fail. And if he had his way, he'd come twice a year. So this is a country I love very much.
Okay. All right, thank you so much. Appreciate the time. Martin Jacques, here with us at the Leaderonomics Show.